Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was the last hope after Thanos snapped Earth's heroes. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world was ending on a Tuesday afternoon, and Izuku Midoriya was taking notes. His pen, a cheap plastic thing chewed nearly to oblivion, flew across the grid pages of his notebook. The news broadcast flickered on the small television in their living room, a chaotic mosaic of grainy satellite footage and frantic talking heads. The headline, stark and terrifying in bold white font against a blood-red banner, read, "Alien Invasion in Wakanda, Avengers in Battle for the Planet." Reports are still unconfirmed, the Japanese news anchor said, her voice strained but professional. But sources within the World Security Council indicate the invading force is led by the same entity responsible for the attack on New York several years ago. A being known only as Thanos. Izuku's muttering was a low, constant hum, a counter-melody to the anchor's grim reportage. "Circular phalanx formation is a mistake against an enemy with overwhelming numbers," he whispered, his green eyes narrowed in intense focus. "Captain America is brilliant at holding a line, but they're being flanked. The Dora Milaje are elite, but they lack the area of effect capabilities needed to thin the horde. If Endeavor were there, his flash fire fist could create a firebreak, cutting off their advance. And Mirko, her speed and leg strength could shatter the larger brutes before they even reach the main line. She could function like the Hulk, but with more precision." His pencil scratched, a frantic spider dancing across the page. Diagrams of the Wakandan battlefield, dotted with little approximations of the alien creatures, Outriders, the broadcast had called them, were being systematically annotated with the names and abilities of Japan's top heroes. "Izuku, honey," a soft voice broke through his concentration. "Your tea is getting cold." He looked up, blinking. His mother, Inko Midoriya, stood by the entrance to the living room, wringing a dish towel in her hands. Her large, kind eyes were fixed on the television, filled with a worry so profound it seemed to age her on the spot. She had always been a worrier, but this was different. This was a fear that resonated on a primal level, a shared global terror that seeped through the screen and chilled the air in their cozy apartment. The apartment itself was a shrine to a hope that felt, at this very moment, impossibly fragile. All Might posters adorned the walls, his heroic, V-shaped smile beaming down from every angle. An All Might alarm clock sat on a shelf, his booming voice programmed to shout, "I am here, to get you to school on time." Figurines in various heroic poses lined his desk and bookshelves, a silent, colorful army standing guard over a quirkless boy's fragile heart. "Thanks, Mom," Izuku said, his voice hoarse. He took a sip of the lukewarm green tea, the familiar bitterness doing little to ground him. His gaze was immediately pulled back to the screen. The footage was harrowing. A blond, bearded man with a shield on each arm fought with savage grace. A woman with glowing red energy held back a massive, spinning machine. A king in a panther-themed suit moved with fluid, deadly speed. These were the Avengers, legends spoken of in the same breath as All Might. And they were losing. "Why haven't they sent more heroes?" Izuku asked, the question aimed at the universe itself. All Might could turn the tide. His Texas smash could scatter that entire army. Best Genist could restrain them. Edge shot could infiltrate their ships. "They said the borders are closed," Sweetie Inko said, her voice trembling slightly. It's too dangerous to fly. That big donut ship in America, and now this." She gestured with the towel towards the television. "It's happening so fast." She was right. The world had been thrown into chaos over the last 24 hours. Reports of an armored tyrant attacking a refugee ship from a place called Asgard, a wizard vanishing from a New York street, a flying donut-shaped warship. And now this, a full-scale ground war in a secretive African nation that was, apparently, the most technologically advanced on Earth. It was too much to process, too vast. His hero analysis, which had always been a source of comfort and control, now felt like trying to map a hurricane with a child's crayon. He focused on what he could control, the ink, the paper, the theories. It was his shield. "The key is the big one," Izuku muttered, tapping his pen on a crude drawing of Thanos. "The reports say he has some kind of gauntlet with stones. The anchor mentioned he already has several. Power, space, reality, soul. It's like a quark singularity event. Each stone amplifies the others. Taking him on-one is suicide, even for All Might. His eyes widened. That's it. It's not a job for one hero. It's a job for all of them. A coordinated strike. You'd need someone to nullify the gauntlet. Mr. Aizawa? No, the stones aren't a quirk. Maybe a support item? May Hatsum could build something to overload its energy signature, but she'd need a schematic, and his muttering was cut short by a sudden shift in the broadcast. The image of Wakanda vanished, replaced by the news studio. The anchor looked shaken. We are interrupting our coverage of the Wakandan crisis with breaking news from here in Japan, she said, her voice cracking for a fraction of a second before her training kicked in. We are going live to the Prime Minister's office, where a statement is being delivered by All Might. Izuku's heart leaped into his throat. A gasp escaped Inko's lips. The screen changed. There he was. Not in his weakened, skeletal form that only Izuku and a select few knew, but in his full, glorious muscle form. The symbol of peace. His blonde hair stood in its iconic two peaks. His face was set in a reassuring, indomitable smile. Though Izuku's trained eye could see the deep-set exhaustion around his shadowed eyes, the lingering price of his battle with All for One. He stood at a podium, the Japanese flag behind him, a bastion of calm in a world descending into madness. My citizens, All Might's voice boomed from the television speakers, a sound that had reassured millions for decades. I know that you are afraid. What you are witnessing on your screens is terrifying. It is a threat on a scale we have never faced. But you must not despair. Izuku leaned forward, his notebook forgotten on his lap. He drank in the sight of his idol, his mentor, the man who had told him, you can become a hero. The Avengers, Earth's mightiest heroes, are fighting for us all in Wakanda, All Might continued, his voice resonating with unshakable conviction. And here in Japan, our heroes stand ready. We are coordinating with global powers. We are preparing. We will not stand idly by while our world is threatened. This enemy, this Thanos, seeks to instill fear. He wants us to cower, but we will show him the unwavering spirit of humanity. We will show him that so long as one person is willing to stand up for another, hope is never, ever lost. So be brave. Look after one another, because we are here. A wave of relief washed over Izuku, so potent it was almost dizzying. Inko let out a shuddering breath, her shoulders slumping. Of course. All Might was here. Everything would be okay. It always was, and then it happened. It started subtly. A flicker of the lights in their apartment. A low hum in the air, like a million cicadas waking at once. Outside the window, on the bustling street below, a woman carrying grocery bags suddenly stumbled. Her bags hit the pavement with a dull thud, apples and oranges rolling across the sidewalk. But the woman, she didn't fall, she disintegrated. Izuku's mind couldn't process it. One moment she was there, a solid, living person. The next, she was a cascade of gray-black dust, caught in the afternoon breeze and scattered into nothingness. Her clothes, her shoes, they all just dissolved with her. What? Izuku breathed. His eyes darted across the street. A man walking his dog. The man vanished. The leash went limp, the collar clattering to the ground. The dog, a Shiba Inu, began to bark in frantic confusion at the spot where its owner had been seconds before. A salaryman leaning against a lamppost, checking his phone. Dust. A teenager on a bicycle. Dust. The bicycle clattered on its side, its wheels spinning uselessly. It was silent. Horrifyingly, unnaturally silent. There were no screams, no explosions, just a quiet, relentless subtraction from the world. Izuku! Inko screamed, her voice a raw shard of terror. She lunged for him, wrapping her arms around him so tightly he could barely breathe. He could feel her whole body trembling, her heart hammering against his back. His eyes were glued to the television, his mind a maelstrom of denial and horror. On the screen, All Might had paused. The confident smile had faltered, replaced by a look of profound confusion. He looked down at his own hand, the one he had raised in a gesture of power and reassurance. It was turning to dust. Starting at the fingertips, his skin began to flake away, not like ash, but like particles of light and shadow being unwritten from reality. The effect crawled up his arm with sickening speed. What is this? All Might's voice was no longer a boom. It was a whisper of disbelief, broadcast to a nation of millions. The reporters and cameramen in the press room behind him were vanishing too, their equipment crashing to the floor. Panic finally erupted. Shouts and screams now filled the audio feed. But All Might remained, his heroic form flickering, struggling against the inevitable erasure. His blue eyes, wide with a dawning horror that Izuku had never seen in them before, found the camera. They found him. It felt like he was looking right at him, right through the screen and into the heart of his small, hero-worshipping apartment. The symbol of peace, the strongest man in the world, was being undone by something he couldn't punch. Young Midoriya. The words were a phantom, a breath of static. Izuku wasn't sure if he'd actually heard them, or if his grief-stricken mind had just imagined them. All Might's body dissolved faster now, his broad chest, the pillar of his strength, crumbling inwards. The iconic smile was gone, replaced by a grimace of effort, of a will fighting against an absolute. His entire body became a storm of swirling dust, and for a single, heart-stopping second, the shape of the hero remained, a silhouette of dissipating motes. Then, he was gone. The podium was empty. The Japanese flag fluttered in a breeze from an open door. The broadcast cut to a test pattern, a single, high-pitched tone screaming into the sudden, deafening silence of the Midoriya apartment. That was the sound that broke the world. The tone screeched for 10 seconds before the emergency broadcast system kicked in, a series of frantic, contradictory alerts. But the sound was drowned out by the noise from outside. The quiet subtraction was over. The consequence had begun. Screams. They came from next door, from the floor above, from the street below. A symphony of pure, unadulterated panic and loss. Car alarms blared as their vanished drivers no longer pressed the brake, leading to a cacophony of screeching tires and crunching metal. The distant, confused wail of a single emergency siren began, soon joined by another, and another, until the air itself seemed to weep with their sound. Inko was sobbing into Izuku's shoulder, her cries ragged and breathless. "What's happening? Izuku, what's happening?" Izuku couldn't answer. He couldn't move. He was frozen, his entire being locked on the static-filled television screen where his hope had just been publicly executed. All Might is gone. The thought was a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. It wasn't like the battle with All for One. That was a fight. There was a struggle, a victory, a passing of the torch. This was an annulment. An invalidation. He didn't lose a fight. He just ended. Izuku gently, mechanically unwrapped his mother's arms from around him. He stumbled on legs that felt like they were made of glass, moving towards the window. He looked down upon his city. Muzdalifa was in chaos. Cars were crashed haphazardly in the streets. People were running, screaming, pointing at empty spaces where their loved ones had been. A helicopter, which had been reporting on traffic, suddenly listed to one side and spiraled downwards, the pilot presumably a victim of the snap. It crashed into a building several blocks away, the explosion a punctuation mark on the end of the world. Powerless, the word echoed in the chambers of his soul. It was the diagnosis that had defined his life, the cruel joke the universe had played on him in a world of wonders. For 14 years, he had felt powerless, but All Might had shown him a path. He had given him one for all. He had given him a chance to defy that powerlessness. Izuku clutched his own arm, the one that was supposed to carry that sacred torch. There was no surge of energy. No crackle of green lightning. He had not yet mastered the quirk, had barely begun to control it. All Might's embers had been passed, but they were not yet aflame. And now, the source of that fire was extinguished. What did that mean for him? Was one for all still inside him? Was it, too, fading into dust? He couldn't feel it. He couldn't feel anything but a vast, hollow emptiness where his dreams used to be. He turned from the window, his gaze falling on his bedroom door, plastered with a life-size All Might sticker. The smile was no longer inspiring. It was a grotesque mockery. A lie, a smiling ghost on the tombstone of his aspirations. He walked numbly into his room. The posters. The figures. The bedsheets. All of it felt like memorabilia from a forgotten religion. He looked at his desk, at the open notebook. Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 13. His own handwriting stared back at him, the frantic scribbles from less than an hour ago. Endeavor's Firebreak. Mirko's Precision. All Might's Texas Smash, useless. Meaningless. The optimistic ramblings of a child trying to predict the outcome of a game, only for the board to be flipped, the pieces scattered, and the rulebook set on fire. The heroes he was analyzing were likely gone. All Might was gone. The Avengers were gone. The symbols of the entire world had been snuffed out like candles in a gale. His hand, trembling, reached out and closed the notebook. The soft thud of the cardboard cover shutting echoed the finality of it all. The sound of a door closing on his future. He sank to his knees, the floor cold against his skin. The sirens wailed outside. His mother wept in the other room. The high-pitched tone from the television had been replaced by a frantic, repeating emergency message that no one was listening to. But in the sudden, stark silence of his own heart, Izuku Midoriya heard nothing. He felt nothing. He was just a boy again. A quirkless, powerless boy in a room full of dead gods. He didn't cry. The shock was too deep, the grief too monumental for tears. Tears were for scraped knees and failed tests. This was an extinction event, not just for the world, but for the very concept of hope that had fueled his entire existence. He stared at the largest poster on his wall, the one directly opposite his bed. It was a classic, All Might in his prime, carrying a dozen people out of a burning building. His smile was radiant, and below it, his most famous quote was printed in bold, heroic letters. "It's fine now." Why? Because I am here. A single, bitter, silent tear finally traced a path through the invisible dust on Izuku's cheek. "No, you're not," the boy thought, as the world outside burned. "You're not here. No one is. Excellent. Let's step into this broken world." 5 years after the fall. 5 years. 5 years was an eternity, and it was no time at all. It was long enough for the initial, shrieking chaos to curdle into a low, permanent hum of despair. Long enough for grass to grow through the cracked asphalt of abandoned highways, for memorials to become weathered landmarks, and for hope to become a dangerous, antique notion, like alchemy or phrenology. The air in Muzudafu, once vibrant with the promise of heroism and progress, now tasted of rust and resignation. A perpetual gray haze, a mixture of industrial smog from unregulated factories and the dust of countless unrepaired ruins, hung low over the city, smudging the sun into a pale, indifferent smear in the sky. The snap, or the decimation, as the shell-shocked global governments had formally named it, hadn't just taken half of all life. It had taken the color from the world. In this monochromatic landscape lived a 19-year-old Izuku Midoriya, though he felt closer to 100. The bright, star-struck boy had been scoured away, leaving behind a young man built of quiet pragmatism and scar tissue, both seen and unseen. The boundless energy that had once propelled him towards every hero fight was now channeled into the mundane, essential rhythm of survival. His shoulders, once perpetually hunched over a notebook, were now straight and tense, carrying the invisible weight of a world without its pillars. His world was now the Muzudafu Community Shelter, a repurposed middle school that had become a bastion for the left behind. He and his mother Inko were among its first volunteers and now its most steadfast residents. Inko, her own grief ossified into a fierce, protective maternal drive, ran the kitchens, turning dwindling rations into warm meals that tasted of a better time. Izuku was the shelter's handyman, its scavenger, its silent guardian. He fixed leaky pipes, patched wiring, reinforced fences, and kept the generator running. These were problems he could solve. They had clear, tangible solutions, unlike the gaping void left by the heroes. He was poring over a sputtering water filtration system, his knuckles scraped raw, when a familiar voice called his name, Izuku. The trucks loaded. He looked up. It was Kenji Tanaka, a retired mechanic who had lost his wife and son in the snap. The old man's face was a roadmap of grief, but his hands were steady, and his eyes held a flicker of the same stubborn resilience Izuku saw in his own mother. "Almost done here," Izuku replied, his voice a low monotone that had become his default. The sediment filter is shot. I can bypass it for now, but we'll need to boil everything until I can find a replacement. Add it to the list, Tanaka grunted, gesturing with his thumb back towards the gymnasium-turned-common area. The supply run to the warehouse district. We're leaving in 10. Izuku nodded, wiped his greasy hands on an equally greasy rag, and gave the pipe one last turn with his wrench. The sputtering stopped, replaced by a steady, gurgling flow. A small victory. These were the only kind he allowed himself anymore. As he walked through the crowded gymnasium, the reality of their world was on full display. Families huddled on cots, children playing quiet games with toys made from scrap, their laughter a fragile sound in the cavernous space. An old television, powered by the generator he so carefully maintained, was tuned to the only remaining 24-hour news channel. The broadcast was a grim litany of border skirmishes, villain-run territories, and pleas for aid from collapsing city-states. The world hadn't ended in fire and fury. It was dying a slow, quiet death from 1,000 cuts. He passed a small, makeshift classroom where a young woman was teaching a handful of children. On the chalkboard behind her were crudely drawn pictures, not of heroes, but of edible plants, water purification methods, and basic first aid. The lessons of the new age. His path took him past the shelter's entrance, and he instinctively averted his gaze from what stood across the street. But it was impossible to truly ignore. It was a slab of polished black granite, erected 2 years after the snap in what used to be a cheerful public park. It was the Musudafu vanished memorial. Hundreds of names were etched into its surface, a fraction of the city's losses. But it was the names at the very top, in larger, bolder letters, that held the most weight. They were the pillars that had fallen. Tashinori Yagi, All Might. The name was a punch to the gut, even after 5 years. It was his greatest secret, a burden he carried alone. The world mourned All Might, the symbol of peace. Izuku mourned Yagi, the frail, kind, determined man who had looked at a quirkless, worthless boy and seen a successor. A promise he had failed to keep. He had tried, in the frantic weeks after the snap. He had broken bones, trying to summon the power of one for all. He'd screamed himself hoarse, trying to feel the crackling energy, the wellspring of strength that was his inheritance. But there was nothing. It was like a phone line that had been cut. The power hadn't vanished, he didn't think. It was still there, a dead, heavy weight in his bones, a car without an ignition key. The embers All Might had passed to him had required the faint, lingering heat of the main fire to ignite. When All Might turned to dust, that connection, that vital spark, had been severed. He was left with a legacy he couldn't access, a ghost limb that only served to remind him of what he was supposed to be. His eyes scanned the other names, each one a fresh sting. Yenjei Todoroki, Endeavor. Kigo Takami, Hawks. Rumi Yasujiyama, Mirko. Tsunaga Hakamada, Best Jeanist. The entire top 10 gone. Annihilated in an instant. Just below them were other familiar names from the news, from his notebooks. Kamui Woods. Empty Lady. Ed Shot. The world's greatest heroes, followed by a list of the Avengers, their names a stark reminder that this loss was global. Stark. Rogers. Romanoff. Maximoff. Wilson. Dust. All of them dust. Stop staring at the graveyard, kid. It'll rot your brain. Izuku turned. Katsuki Bakugo stood there, leaning against the doorframe of the shelter. At 19, Bakugo was sharper, leaner, and somehow more intense than he had been at 14. The 5 years had not mellowed him, they had honed his explosive anger into a razor's edge. He hadn't been snapped. In a cruel twist of cosmic irony, most of the students who would have been in their class at UA had survived. They had been too young, too unknown to be on the front lines, and had been scattered across the country when it happened. Bakugo was one of the shelter's primary defenders. His quirk, Explosion, was one of the few remaining high-power abilities in the city not aligned with a villain faction. He was a volatile, foul-mouthed, and brutally effective deterrent. I wasn't, Izuku said flatly. Bullshit, Bakugo sneered, his red eyes narrowed. You get that same stupid look on your face you used to get. Like you're seeing ghosts. He pushed off the wall. You coming on the run or are you gonna stand here moping all day, Deku? The old nickname no longer carried the same sting. It was just a name now. Useless. That's what he was. A handyman. A mechanic. Useful in his own small way, but still Deku. I'm coming, Izuku said, walking past him towards the waiting supply truck, an old, armored vehicle they'd salvaged from a disbanded police force. As he passed his and his mother's small, partitioned room, he glanced inside. He saw the corner of his closet, where a sealed cardboard box sat on the top shelf. It contained 15 notebooks, filled with the frantic, hopeful scrawls of a boy who believed in heroes. Hero analysis for the future. He hadn't opened that box in 5 years. It was another tombstone he couldn't bear to look at. The warehouse district was a skeleton. Vast, empty buildings loomed like hollowed-out ribcages against the gray sky. Weeds grew thick and fast, nature's patient attempt to reclaim the monuments of a dead economy. This was the fringe, the liminal space between the fragile order of the survivor enclaves and the outright anarchy of the outer city. Their convoy consisted of 2 vehicles. The armored truck, driven by Tanaka, with Bakugo riding shotgun, his gauntlets glinting in the dim light, and a smaller, faster pickup truck, which Izuku was driving, with 2 other volunteers, a young woman named Yui and a man named Kaido, in the back with the empty containers. See anything, Deku? Bakugo's voice crackled over the cheap walkie-talkie. Izuku scanned the rooftops, the alleyways, his eyes not looking for heroes or villains, but for threats. 4 ambush points. 4 glints of light that didn't belong. This was his analysis now. Not quirks and ultimate moves, but angles, escape routes, and structural integrity. All clear on our end, Izuku replied, his voice calm. The overpass up ahead looks a little unstable. I'd give the support columns a wide berth. No shit, nerd, Bakugo crackled back. The line went dead. They were heading for a sealed medical supply depot. Their intel, gathered from another survivor group, suggested it had been overlooked during the initial post-snap looting sprees. They were dangerously low on antibiotics and sterile bandages at the shelter. This run was not just important, it was vital. The silence of the area was unnerving. It was a predator's silence. The kind that comes before an attack. Izuku's hands tightened on the steering wheel, his knuckles white. He hated this feeling, the feeling of being bait. They reached the warehouse. The massive roll-up door was rusted shut, just as their intel said. Bakugo grinned, a feral, wolfish thing. My turn. He hopped out of the truck, his movements fluid and confident. Everyone back up, he commanded. No one argued. He placed his hands on the door, small, controlled explosions popping in his palms like firecrackers. Then, with a roar, he unleashed a concentrated blast. AP shot. The focused explosion blew the lock mechanism to pieces. The door groaned, but didn't budge, its bottom edge fused to the concrete by years of rust. With another grunt of effort, Bakugo and Kaido managed to wrench it upwards, just enough to create a gap to squeeze through. The air inside was stale, smelling of dust and antiseptic. Rows upon rows of shelves stretched into the gloom, laden with boxes. It was a jackpot. Yui, Kaido, start loading the essentials. Antibiotics, painkillers, sutures first, Izuku directed, his voice crisp and authoritative in the enclosed space. He was no longer the stuttering fanbo. Here, in the field, he was a strategist. Bakugo, take the roof. Watch our backs. I'll do a perimeter sweep. Bakugo scoffed but complied, using his explosions to launch himself effortlessly onto the roof. He was their watchdog, their cannon. Izuku was the eyes and ears on the ground. It was a system that worked. Izuku circled the building, his worn-out combat boots crunching softly on gravel and broken glass. He noted every potential point of entry, every shadow that was deep enough to hide a man. His heart beat a steady, tense rhythm. It was on his second lap that he saw it. Fresh tracks in the thick dust near a side maintenance door. Not their tracks. These were heavier, sloppier. And nearby, a discarded cigarette, still faintly warm. They weren't alone. His blood ran cold. He pulled his walkie-talkie, his thumb hovering over the button. He had 2 choices. Alert Bakugo, which would likely result in a preemptive, noisy, and potentially dangerous assault. Or, he could try to get his people out quietly before the ambush was sprung. His mind raced, processing variables. The villains know we're here. They let us in. They're waiting for the prize. They want the supplies. They'll hit us when we're loaded, when we're most vulnerable. He chose a third option. He keyed the walkie-talkie, his voice deliberately calm. Bakugo. Status? Boring as hell up here, came the reply. Nothing but rats and rust. Good. Keep your eyes peeled, Izuku said. He then switched to the secondary channel he and the loaders used. Yui Kaido. We've got company. Don't panic. Load what you have into the pickup. Leave the rest. We're getting out now. Move quietly. He heard a soft gasp over the radio, then a whispered, understood. Izuku crept back toward the front of the warehouse, his mind a whirlwind of calculations. He saw them now, hiding behind piles of debris and derelict vehicles. At least 5 of them. Scavengers. Vultures. One was large and brutish, with skin that looked like cracked stone. Another was thin and wiry, with long, metallic claws instead of fingers. The leader, a man with a greasy ponytail and a cruel smirk, was idly creating small, shimmering cubes of hard light in his hand, tossing them up and down. They were positioned to cut off the path to the armored truck. A classic pincer move. Amateurs, but dangerous amateurs. He saw Yui and Kaido slip out of the warehouse, their faces pale with fear, and quietly load the few boxes they had into the pickup. They were exposed. It was now or never. Izuku needed a diversion. A big one. His eyes darted around the scrap-filled yard. A stack of old, rusted oil drums. A pile of sheet metal. A derelict forklift with its tines pointing skyward. An idea, desperate and insane, sparked in his mind. It was the kind of complex, multi-stage plan he used to write in his notebooks, a theoretical ballet of cause and effect. He keyed his walkie. Bakugo. Southeast corner of the yard. See the stack of oil drums? Yeah? What about M? There's a leaking one at the bottom. I need you to hit it with a small, precise blast. Not enough to detonate the whole stack, just enough to ignite the leaking fuel and create a firewall. There was a pause. Why the hell would I do that? Trust me, Izuku said, his voice leaving no room for argument. The tone was so unlike his usual self that it seemed to stun Bakugo into silence for a second. Fine. But this better be good, Deku. On my signal, Izuku whispered. He picked up a heavy piece of rebar from the ground, the cold steel a poor but necessary substitute for a weapon. He took a deep breath. Now, he hissed into the radio. From the roof, a pinpoint blast of light shot out. It struck the oil drum with a sharp crack. A plume of fire erupted, a sudden, violent wall of orange that separated the ambushers from their prize. They cried out in surprise, shielding their faces. This was his chance. Go! Izuku screamed at Yui and Kaido. They scrambled into the pickup's cab, but the villains recovered quickly. The leader, his face twisted in a snarl, saw Izuku. Get him! He's the brains! The brute with the stone skin charged. Izuku was fast, but he was just a man. The villain was a tank. Izuku sidestepped the initial clumsy swing, which shattered the concrete where he had been standing. He was outmatched in every physical way. Don't fight him. Use the environment. The thought was a lifeline. As the brute charged again, Izuku didn't run away. He ran towards the forklift. He ducked under another swinging fist and kicked the hydraulic lever on the side of the machine. It was rusted and stiff, but his desperate kick was just enough. With a groan of tortured metal, the forklift's tines, which had been pointing up, slammed down. They didn't hit the brute. They hit the massive pile of sheet metal stacked beside it. The resulting crash was deafening, a cascade of clattering, ringing steel. The brute was startled, turning towards the noise, momentarily confused. It was the opening Izuku needed. He sprinted for the pickup, yanking the passenger door open and diving inside as Yui floored the accelerator. The truck fishtailed on the gravel, its engine screaming. The clawed villain lunged, his metallic talons scraping a deep gash down the side of the truck, missing Izuku's head by inches. They were almost clear. But the leader wasn't done. He threw one of his hard light cubes. It wasn't aimed at the truck. It was aimed at the support column of the unstable overpass Izuku had noted earlier. The cube struck the crumbling concrete with a sickening crunch. With a groan that shook the ground, the massive slab of roadway began to tilt, threatening to fall and block their only escape route. "Bakugo!" Izuku yelled into the walkie. "The overpass. We need to get through." "I'm on it," Bakugo roared back. Izuku could see him on the roof, a silhouette against the fire. He wasn't aiming at the overpass. He was aiming at the villains. A massive explosion, far larger than the first, erupted in the middle of the ambushers. Stun grenade! The flash was blinding, the sound concussive. The villains were thrown back, disoriented and screaming. The distraction gave Tanaka his opening. The armored truck surged forward, its reinforced bumper smashing through the weakened support column like a battering ram. The overpass groaned, but it held for a few precious seconds as both their vehicles sped underneath. Then, with a ground-shaking roar, a 50-ton section of highway collapsed onto the road behind them, sealing the path. They were safe. The adrenaline began to recede, and with it, the pain started to register. Izuku looked down at his arm. A long, shallow gash was bleeding freely, a gift from the clawed villain, and his side throbbed with a dull, insistent ache where he had slammed it against the forklift. He was bruised, bleeding, and trembling, but he was alive. They were all alive. Yui was crying softly in the driver's seat. Kaido was hyperventilating in the back. But they were alive. The walkie crackled. It was Bakugo, his voice raspy. "You okay, Deku?" There was no insult in it. Just a question. "We're okay," Izuku managed to say. "Good work, Kaken." "Yeah, well," Bakugo coughed. "Your stupid plan actually worked. Don't get used to it." The line went dead. Back at the shelter, the atmosphere was a mixture of relief and grim reality. They had the supplies, but the cost was 2 damaged vehicles and several injuries, including Izuku's. His mother fussed over him, cleaning and bandaging his arm with a practiced hand, her worried silence more damning than any lecture. Later that evening, Izuku sat on the edge of his cot, the hastily stitched wound on his arm a throbbing reminder of the day's events. He'd done it. His plan had worked. He had used his mind, his analysis, to save them. He should have felt something. Pride. Relief. Anything. Instead, all he felt was a cold, burning rage. He looked at his own hands. They were clever hands. They could fix a generator, analyze a battlefield, and throw a rock at the right time. But they were powerless. He had to rely on tricks, on luck, on Bakugo's overwhelming power. He had danced on a razor's edge, and the only reason they were all alive was because his desperate gamble had paid off. What if it hadn't? What if the forklift lever had been too rusted? What if Bakugo had been a second too late? He had saved 3 people. How many had died in this city today because there was no one to save them? How many more would die tomorrow? The frustration was a physical thing, a sickness in his gut. It was the old, familiar ache of inadequacy, magnified 1,000 times. He had given up on being a hero because he thought he had no power. But today, he had seen, with blinding clarity, that the will was still there. That analytical, life-saving instinct was still burning inside him, buried under 5 years of cynicism. And it was furious. It was a caged animal, rattling the bars of his physical limitations. He stood up, the pain in his side flaring. He walked to his closet and reached up to the top shelf. His fingers brushed against the worn cardboard of the box. With a deep, shuddering breath, he pulled it down. He sat on his cot and lifted the lid. Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 1 through 15. He opened the last one, the one he had been writing in on the day the world ended. His own neat, frantic handwriting stared up at him. Theories on how to combine quirks. Support item ideas. Weaknesses of villains he'd seen on the news. It was the work of a hopeful, brilliant, naive child. But as he looked at it now, through the eyes of a 19-year-old survivor, he saw something else. He saw patterns. He saw strategies. He saw the same logical processes that had allowed him to map out the escape from the warehouse. It wasn't just hero worship. It was raw, powerful analysis. A flicker. Deep inside the hollowed-out cavern of his chest, a single, stubborn ember glowed to life. The frustration he felt wasn't the cold anger of resignation. It was hot. It was the rage of a born protector who was being denied his tools. He closed the notebook and put it back in the box, but he didn't put the box away. He left it on the floor next to his cot. He laid back, hissing as his injured side protested. He stared at the stained ceiling of his small room, the distant sounds of the shelter a familiar lullaby. The world had no pillars. The symbols were dead, the gods were gone. There was no one to look up to, no one coming to save them. The weight of that truth was immense, crushing. But for the first time in 5 years, Izuku Midoriya felt a different sensation mixing with the despair. A dangerous, foolish, and utterly undeniable thought. If there are no heroes, then someone has to become one. The flicker of the ember did not die. It held. And it waited. The days following the warehouse incident settled into a familiar, grim rhythm. The antibiotics were a godsend, stemming a budding infection in the shelter's small infirmary. The armored truck was repaired with scavenged parts and a great deal of cursing from Tanaka. Izuku's arm healed, leaving a thin, silvery scar that joined the collection of nicks and cuts that mapped his life as a handyman. But the simmering rage in his chest did not cool. It was a low pilot light, a constant, burning reminder of his own fragility in the face of the world's casual brutality. This frustration drove him. It pushed him out of the relative safety of the shelter and back into the skeletal ruins of the city. He told his mother and Tanaka he was looking for spare parts for the shelter's failing communications array, which was true. The walkie-talkies had been damaged in the escape, and their main shortwave radio was more static than signal. But there was a deeper, unspoken motive. He was hunting for an edge, a tool, anything that could tip the scales even a fraction of an inch away from helpless victim. His search led him to a place the locals had nicknamed the Scab. It was a sprawling industrial junkyard on the western edge of Muzurifu, a graveyard of the pre-snap technological boom. Mountains of rusted machinery, obsolete consumer electronics, and the husks of failed corporate ventures lay baking under the hazy sun. It was a dangerous place, frequented by other scavengers with less noble intentions, but it was also a treasure trove for a boy who knew what to look for. Izuku moved with a quiet, practiced efficiency, his eyes scanning the debris not as junk, but as a catalog of components. He ignored the shattered phones and cracked monitors, his gaze fixed on the more robust industrial tech. He needed a signal amplifier, high-grade coaxial cable, and a stable power converter. His analysis of their radio's problem was, as always, meticulous. He found the converter in the wreck of a broadcast van, and the cable was spooled around a collapsed transmission tower. The amplifier, however, remained elusive. He was about to give up for the day, the sinking sun casting long, distorted shadows that made the junk piles look like slumbering beasts, when he saw it. Tucked away beneath a pile of scorched circuit boards was a sleek, dark gray wedge of metal and circuitry that looked hilariously out of place. It was undamaged, its surface a matte, non-reflective material he'd never seen before. Etched onto its casing was a logo that made his breath catch, a stylized letter S intertwined with a circle. Stark Industries. Pre-snap, Stark Tech was the gold standard, but it was almost exclusively found in America. To find a piece here, in a Muzurifu junkyard, was beyond rare. It was an anomaly. The device was a comms booster, according to the label, but it was far more compact and advanced than anything he had ever seen. A piece of a forgotten, better world. He carefully disconnected it from the mangled wreckage it was attached to and packed it in his bag. A strange feeling, like holding a religious artifact, prickling his skin. Back in the shelter, he sequestered himself in his workshop, a cramped, poorly lit corner of the boiler room he'd claimed as his own. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and hot metal. Diagrams and schematics, drawn in his own neat hand, were tacked to the cinder block walls. This was his sanctuary, the only place he felt truly competent. He laid his scavenged parts out on his workbench. The comms booster was the centerpiece. He integrated it into the shelter's main radio, his hands moving with the deftness of a surgeon. He rerouted the power, spliced the cables, and bypassed the fried circuits. Finally, he flipped the switch. For a moment, there was only the familiar, frustrating hiss of static. He felt a pang of disappointment. Then, he turned the dial on the Stark booster. The static didn't just clear. It vanished. The silence was so absolute it was unnerving. He had tapped into a dead frequency. He was about to switch it off when a new sound emerged. It wasn't a voice. It was a pulse. Beep boop beep. Beep boop beep. Beep boop beep. It was faint, rhythmic, and incredibly complex. A digital heartbeat. Izuku leaned closer, his own heart starting to pound in time with the signal. This wasn't a standard radio wave. It was an encrypted data packet, repeating on a loop. It was hiding in plain sight, on a frequency so high and clean that normal receivers would have dismissed it as empty air. But the Stark booster could hear it perfectly. The part of his brain that used to dissect quirks, to map out hero movesets and predict battle outcomes, word to life. This was a puzzle. A code. And for the first time in years he felt that old, familiar thrill of analysis, the chase of an answer. For 2 days, he worked feverishly, barely sleeping, subsisting on the rice balls his mother left for him. He cross-referenced the signal's pulse with Morse code, binary, and every encryption method he could find in old, downloaded textbooks. It was none of them. It was something proprietary. Something stark. The breakthrough came when he stopped trying to translate it as a language and started analyzing it as a set of coordinates combined with a key. The main repeating sequence was a geographic location, pinpointed to a desolate, abandoned industrial park about 10 kilometers outside the city limits. The secondary pulses, the little boops between the main beeps, were the key. A sequence. A password. And woven into the very fabric of the signal, so faint he almost missed it, was a single, 3-letter message, repeating over and over like a ghost in the machine. SOS. Someone, or something, was calling for help. From a place that was supposed to be empty. He couldn't tell anyone. How could he explain it? That he'd found a ghost signal from a dead billionaire on a piece of impossible technology? Bakugo would call him a delusional idiot and try to blow up the radio. His mother would forbid him from going, her face etched with worry. This was his discovery. His responsibility. The next morning, under the pretense of another supply run, he took one of the shelter's electric motorcycles. He told no one his true destination. The ride to the industrial park was tense. The further he got from the shelter's zone of relative safety, the more the world showed its decay. The roads were fractured and treacherous. He passed hollowed-out cars and buildings scarred with the graffiti of burgeoning villain gangs. The coordinates led him to exactly what he expected, another ruin. The sign at the entrance, hanging crookedly from a single bolt, read Stark Industries Futuristics Division Japan RD Campus. The place was a monument to failure. The windows were shattered, the walls were covered in grime and vines, and the main building looked like it had been picked clean by vultures years ago. It was the perfect place to hide something. He dismounted, the salvaged comms booster clutched in his hand. As he got closer to the main building, the device began to vibrate, the rhythmic pulse from the radio now a tactile sensation in his palm. It was a divining rod, pulling him forward. It led him not to the main entrance, but around the back, to a featureless slab of concrete wall covered in moss. There was nothing there. No door, no handle, no keypad. He was about to slam his fist against the wall in frustration when he saw it, a small, almost invisible seam in the concrete, outlining a perfect square about the size of his hand. And in the center of that square was a faint, circular indentation, the exact size and shape of the Stark Industries logo. On a hunch, he pressed the comms booster against the indentation. The device in his hand lit up, a soft blue light emanating from its core. It emitted a series of complex tones, the key. The sound was absorbed by the wall, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a near-silent hiss of pressurized air, the square panel retracted. Behind it was not a keypad, but a biometric scanner. A green light swept over his hand, and a calm, female, synthetic voice spoke, seemingly from the air itself. Genetic marker not recognized. Quirk factor not detected. Vital signs elevated. Cross-referencing contingency parameters. Parameter empty quiver matched. Parameter last man standing matched. Welcome, candidate. Please stand back. With a low hum that vibrated through the soles of his shoes, a section of the concrete wall slid sideways, revealing a dark, descending staircase. The air that wafted out was cool, dry, and sterile. It smelled of a world that had not been left to rot. His heart hammering against his ribs, Izuku descended. The staircase ended in a small airlock. The door behind him hissed shut, and the one in front of him opened into a cavernous, brightly lit space that stole his breath. He was standing on a gantry overlooking a vast, subterranean complex. It was a laboratory, a command center, and an armory all in one. Sleek, dark metal walkways crisscrossed the space. Banks of servers hummed quietly behind reinforced glass. A central platform dominated the room, surrounded by holographic projectors and control consoles. And everywhere he looked, he saw the fusion. The sleek, utilitarian aesthetic of Stark Industries was unmistakable, in the polished chrome, the blue-glowing arc reactor motifs, and the sheer technological density of the place. But there was an overlay, an ideological skin grafted onto the machinery. The indirect lighting cast a subtle palette of red, white, and blue. Monitors displayed data streams next to stylized, motivational slogans. And on the far wall, a massive, backlit logo was displayed, a perfect synthesis of an arc reactor and the heroic, V-shaped crest of All Might. Below it, words were projected in clean, sharp lettering. The Heroic Legacy Initiative, Arc 07. Izuku stumbled forward, his mind reeling. This place, it was impossible. It was a secret buried beneath a secret. A time capsule from the Age of Heroes. He walked, as if in a trance, towards the central platform. As his foot touched the metal circle, the main lights in the chamber dimmed, and the holographic projectors whirred to life. Two figures flickered into existence in front of him. They were life-sized, incredibly detailed, and achingly familiar. One was Tony Stark. He wasn't wearing his armor, just a black t-shirt, jeans, and a look of grim preoccupation. He paced back and forth, his hands fidgeting with a holographic interface only he could see. The other figure stood perfectly still, and the sight of him made Izuku's knees feel weak. It was All Might. Not the emaciated Toshinori Yagi, but the symbol of peace in his prime. However, this was not the beaming hero from the posters. This was the All Might from after the Battle of Kamino. The exhaustion was plain to see in the deep shadows of his eyes, the slight slump of his colossal shoulders. He wore a look of weary but profound determination. Stark stopped pacing and looked directly at where Izuku stood. "Okay, let's get this over with," he began, his voice tinny and recorded, yet filled with his trademark impatient energy. "If you're seeing this, it means a few things. 1. You're not on any official hero registry. 2. You stumbled upon one of my breadcrumbs. And 3. The world has gone to hell in a handbasket." He gestured vaguely. "The Avengers Initiative was a success, mostly. But I'm a futurist. I plan for obsolescence, including our own. I call this the worst-case scenario Palooza Protocol. What happens when the big guns are taken off the board? Not just defeated. Erased. Gone. An event that decapitates the planet's defenses in one fell swoop." All Might stepped forward, his holographic presence commanding the room. "A world without its symbols," he said, his voice a low, somber rumble. "A world without hope. We have seen what that does to people. Fear takes root. Chaos blossoms. The good people, the everyday heroes, are left defenseless." Stark nodded, his expression uncharacteristically serious. "Exactly, Point Break's other brother. So we, meaning me and the big guy here, representing our respective sides of the superpowered pond, put our heads together. We created the Heroic Legacy Initiative, a series of deep-level, self-sustaining shelters. Arcs. Not for people, but for the idea of heroism itself." The holographic display shifted. It showed schematics, training simulations, global threat analysis systems running in the background. "This arc contains everything," Stark continued. "Global communications network, fabrication unit, tactical databases on every known enhanced individual, friendly and hostile. Everything you need to mount a defense, or at least, not go down swinging blind." All Might placed a calming hand on Stark's shoulder, a gesture of quiet solidarity that spoke volumes. "But technology is not enough," the hero said, his gaze seeming to pierce right through Izuku. "A weapon is useless without a hand to wield it. A symbol is meaningless without a heart to give it life. We knew that the person who found this place might not have powers. They might not be a soldier or a trained hero." Stark smirked, a flash of his old arrogance. Which is where my contribution comes in. He swiped his hand, and the hologram behind them changed. A section of the floor in the real world slid open, and a platform rose, bathed in brilliant white light. On it stood a single suit of armor. It was breathtaking. It was clearly built on an Iron Man framework, the sleek, powerful lines, the arc reactor in the chest, but its design was pure All Might. The color scheme was a vibrant red, white, and blue. The helmet was designed with two soaring, golden fins that mimicked All Might's iconic hair. The chest plate was emblazoned with a shining, V-shaped chevron. It was a perfect marriage of technology and symbolism. The symbol class armor, Model I, All Might, Stark announced, a hint of pride in his voice. It's a force multiplier. It can be piloted by a baseline human. It provides strength, speed, durability, flight. It's got the standard Iron Man repulsor package, plus a few kinetic surprises I cooked up. It's designed for one purpose, to allow a single, determined individual to stand where a giant once stood. Power is not the prerequisite, All Might stated, his voice ringing with conviction. Will is. Courage is. The indomitable spirit of a true hero who runs in when others run away. That is the only qualification required. The two holographic figures stood side by side, two fallen pillars from a lost age, delivering their final testament. Stark's hologram began to flicker, as if the recording was ending. He looked away from the camera, a flash of genuine sadness in his eyes. The tools are here, he said quietly. The rest, that's on you. Good luck. You're gonna need it. He vanished in a shower of blue pixels. Only All Might remained. He took one step forward, and his holographic eyes, filled with a weary, ancient hope, seemed to lock with Izuku's. It was the same look he'd given him on that rooftop, the day he'd inherited One for All. The same look he'd given the camera, the day he turned to dust. I once told a young man that he, too, could become a hero, All Might said, his voice soft, personal, and utterly devastating. A hero is not someone who is never afraid. A hero is someone who, in the face of fear and despair, chooses to act. Who chooses to save. Who chooses to inspire. He stood at his full, heroic height, the very image of the symbol the world had lost. If you are seeing this, he said, his final words echoing in the vast, silent chamber, it means we have failed. The world has lost its symbol. Now, it falls to you to become its last hope. The hologram dissolved, leaving Izuku Midoriya standing alone in the sudden, crushing silence. Before him, the armor gleamed under the spotlight, an impossible legacy waiting to be claimed. On his left arm, a new scar throbbed. In his bones, the dead weight of a silent quirk rested. And in his heart, the tiny, furious ember of his own heroic spirit roared, suddenly faced with a universe of fuel. Hope had a price. And it was staring him right in the face. The silence that followed All Might's final, holographic words was heavier than any collapsed building. It was a silence filled with the weight of expectation, the gravity of a dead man's hope. Izuku Midoriya stood frozen on the central platform of the ark, his breath a ghost in his lungs, his eyes locked on the gleaming suit of armor before him. It was magnificent. It was terrifying. It was an answer to a prayer he hadn't dared to whisper for 5 years, and it felt like a blasphemy. Slowly, as if moving through deep water, he stepped off the platform and approached the armor. It stood on its plinth like a modern-day idol, the ambient light of the ark catching on its polished red, white, and blue plating. He could see the intricate lines of Stark's engineering, the seamless joins, the quiet power coiled within its frame. He could see the soaring, golden fins of All Might's ethos, a declaration of heroic intent. It was the fusion of the world's two greatest heroes, a legacy forged in steel and ideology, and it was supposed to be for him. A hysterical laugh almost bubbled up in his throat. Him? A candidate? He was Deku. He was the quirkless boy whose only claim to power was a dormant, inaccessible inheritance from one of the men who built this place. He was the handyman who fixed leaky pipes and got his arms sliced open by a common street thug. The armor wasn't just a size too big. It was a different species of clothing for a different species of being. His hand, trembling, reached out and touched the cool, smooth metal of the gauntlet. The material felt impossibly solid, a tangible piece of a forgotten age of miracles. His fingertips traced the outline of the repulsor port on the palm. He had spent hundreds of hours analyzing Iron Man's technology in his notebooks, theorizing about the arc reactor's output, the flight stabilizers, the targeted repulsor blasts. It was the stuff of legend. And now it was here, real and waiting. "I can't," he whispered, the words swallowed by the vastness of the chamber. I'm not him. I'm not either of them." He thought of the scar on his arm, a dull throb that served as a constant reminder of his own fragility. He thought of his fractured ankle, still aching from his brilliant plan at the warehouse. This armor was a lie. It was a costume that would let him pretend to be strong, pretend to be a hero, but underneath, he would still be the same breakable, powerless boy. Biometric and psychological assessments indicate a high probability of imposter syndrome. The voice was calm, synthesized, and startlingly clear. It emanated from the chamber itself, seeming to come from everywhere at once. Izuku yelped and stumbled back, his heart leaping into his throat. He scanned the empty walkways, the silent server banks. He was alone. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice cracking. "My designation is Teosei Chai," the voice replied. "Tactical Operational Sentient Heuristic Intelligence. I am the primary operating system and caretaker of ARC-07. I was created by Tony Stark, with ethical and strategic subroutines provided by Toshinori Yagi." Izuku stared blankly at the ceiling. Teosei Chai. The name was a gut punch. A tribute. "You're an AI?" "That is a functional, if simplified, description. I have been in a dormant, monitoring state for 1,826 days. Your activation of the breadcrumb and subsequent entry has initiated my full operational status. Welcome, Candidate Midoriya." A holographic light scanned him from head to toe, a shimmering green grid that moved over his body. A screen flickered to life on a nearby console, displaying data that made him flush with embarrassment. Candidate, Izuku Midoriya, age 19. Quirk status, classified level 7. Physical condition, mild malnutrition. Evidence of recent soft tissue trauma to left clavicle region, healing. Healing hairline fracture in left talus bone. Multiple instances of scar tissue indicative of repeated minor injuries. Elevated heart rate and cortisol levels consistent with acute stress and anxiety. Quirk status classified? Izuku muttered, confused. Correct, Teosei Chai replied. The unique energy signature within your system does not match any registered quirk in the global database. It is dormant, but present. It registers as a legacy quirk, directly linked to the genetic and energetic marker of founder Toshinori Yagi. As per his directive, all data pertaining to One for All is sealed. Izuku felt a wave of dizziness. The AI knew. It knew everything. It saw the ghost of the power he carried, the inheritance he couldn't touch. It saw his scars, his weak ankle, his frayed nerves. It saw him for exactly what he was, a broken boy with a broken quirk. Then you know I'm the wrong person, Izuku said, his voice flat. I can't access that power. I'm effectively quirkless. The contingency failed. You picked the wrong guy. The contingency did not specify a quirk was necessary, the AI stated, its tone unchanging. It specified a psychological profile, high aptitude for strategic analysis, elevated empathy response, and a demonstrated history of self-sacrificial behavior in the aid of others, even in the absence of personal power. Your profile is a 97.3% match for the heroic spirit parameters established by Founder Yagi. Izuku just shook his head, overwhelmed. That's just a fancy way of saying I'm a reckless idiot. That is one possible interpretation, Teosei Chai conceded. Shall we begin orientation for the symbol class armor, Candidate Midoriya? He should have said no. He should have turned around, walked back up the stairs, and sealed this tomb of impossible expectations behind him forever. But the holographic face of All Might, filled with weary hope, was burned into his memory. It falls to you. Yes, Izuku heard himself say, his voice barely a whisper. Let's begin. The chamber around them transformed. Sections of the floor retracted, revealing a padded, gymnasium-like space. The plinth with the armor lowered, and mechanical arms extended, pulling the suit apart piece by piece. Please step into the initiation circle, Toshi instructed. With trepidation, Izuku did as he was told. The process of donning the armor was surreal. The leg pieces clamped around him first, then the torso, the arms, the gauntlets. It wasn't heavy, the internal mechanisms were already bearing the weight. Finally, the helmet descended, sealing him inside with a soft hiss. His world became a cascade of light and data. A heads-up display, or HUD, flickered to life before his eyes, a translucent blue screen overlaying his vision. He saw power levels, atmospheric readings, a biometric display of his own vitals, and a compass. In the top right corner, a miniature, glowing version of the All Might crest pulsed gently. Neurointerface syncing, Toshi's voice said, now directly in his ear. Calibration complete. The armor is now an extension of your body. Try taking a step. Izuku thought about taking a step. The armored leg moved forward, but his own ingrained sense of balance was completely off. The step was too long, too powerful. He stumbled, pinwheeling his arms wildly. The suit's internal gyroscopes whirred, fighting to keep him upright, but his own frantic movements counteracted them. He went down with a deafening crash of metal on padded flooring. Lying on his back like an overturned turtle, staring up at the distant ceiling, Izuku groaned. Okay. This is going to be harder than it looks. An accurate assessment, Toshi agreed. Let us proceed to Simulation 01 Basic Combat. The world outside his helmet dissolved, replaced by a photorealistic image of a dojo. A training dummy stood in the center. Your objective is to strike the target, the AI instructed. Izuku struggled back to his feet, the armor feeling less like a second skin and more like a full-body cast. He planted his feet, trying to remember the stance he'd seen All Might use 1,000 times. He drew his arm back, channeling every ounce of his heroic admiration into the movement. Detroit. Smash! He yelled, the sound muffled inside his helmet. He threw the punch. There was a surge of power from the arm's servos, but it wasn't the pure, overwhelming kinetic force of One for All. It was mechanical, clunky. His fist connected with the dummy, sending it flying across the dojo and smashing it into a shower of digital pixels. But the recoil was all wrong. It wasn't absorbed by his body. It traveled up the mechanical joints of the suit. His entire upper body was thrown off balance, and he staggered backward, his other arm flailing. A bright blue beam of energy shot from his flailing palm, blasting a hole in the digital ceiling. What was that? Izuku yelped. You inadvertently activated the left palm repulsor, Toshi explained calmly. Kinetic transference from your punch was inefficiently distributed, causing a 112% feedback loop into the shoulder joint. Minor stress fractures have been detected in the gauntlet's composite plating. It is recommended you do not shout brand name attacks. It appears to negatively impact your form. Izuku gritted his teeth, his face burning with shame. He was so pathetic he was literally breaking the suit by trying to imitate his idol. Fine, he muttered. Simulation 02 Flight. The dojo vanished, replaced by a simulation of the open sky above Mizudafu, vast and blue. The armor's primary flight method is through boot-mounted repulsor jets, Toshi said. They are controlled via neurointerface, but require fine motor control and balance. I suggest a low-power hover to begin. Izuku ignored the advice. All Might didn't hover. He leaped. He soared. He bent his knees, thinking, up. Fast. He got what he asked for. The boot jets ignited with a roar, launching him skyward like a missile. He wasn't prepared for the G-force, his stomach lurching into his throat. He shot past the simulated clouds in seconds. Panic seized him. He tried to correct, to level out, but his frantic thoughts only translated into erratic bursts from the jets. He pinwheeled through the air, a clumsy metal comet. The simulated ground rushed up to meet him. He screamed, squeezing his eyes shut. A moment before impact, the simulation froze. He was left hanging, nose down, 10 feet above a digital street. Flight control has been manually overridden, Toshi said, its voice devoid of anything that could be mistaken for sarcasm, yet it felt like the most damning judgment in the world. Your trajectory would have resulted in an impact crater 7.4 meters in diameter, and your immediate incapacitation. May I return to my previous suggestion of a low-power hover? The simulation ended, and he was back in the training room, the armor slumping to the floor as Tsuchai cut the power to the legs. Izuku lay there, panting, sweat plastering his hair to his forehead inside the helmet. Failure. Utter, spectacular failure. He couldn't walk, he couldn't punch, and he couldn't fly. He wasn't a hero. He was a monkey with a machine gun, a danger to himself and everyone around him. This armor is a tool, candidate, Tsuchai said, its voice echoing the core of his frustration. Not a replacement for a quirk. Founder Yagi's abilities were biological, an explosive release of kinetic energy from his very being. The suit operates on principles of focused energy projection and servo-assisted motion. You are attempting to use a scalpel as a sledgehammer. You must unlearn what you think you know about heroes and learn the mechanics of the tool you are wearing. Just shut up. Izuku snapped, his voice raw. He fumbled for the helmet's release latch. I can't do this. I told you, you got the wrong person. This was a mistake. Alert. The AI's voice cut through his spiral of self-pity, its tone shifting subtly, becoming more urgent. The main screen in the Ark lit up, overriding the simulation. Active crime in progress detected. I have intercepted a Priority 1 dispatch from the Mizuta Municipal Police. A map appeared on the screen, a red circle flashing ominously. Izuku's blood ran cold. It was Sector 7G. The district right next to his shelter. A staticky, panicked voice filled the chamber, piped in from the police radio. Pinned down near the old market square. The villain he's tearing up the street, requesting immediate backup from any available hero units. Repeat, any available units. There was a scream, and the sound of crunching metal. Hero units, Izuku whispered bitterly. There aren't any. Tsuchai brought up a file. A grainy photo of a burly man with a cruel face appeared. Villain codename, Sledge. Quirk, Hammerfist. Allows the user to transform his forearms and fists into dense, sledgehammer-like protrusions of hardened bone and keratin. Threat level, C- pre-snap. Current threat level, B+, post-snap. A B+ villain. Not a world-ender, but more than enough to overwhelm the handful of poorly equipped police officers left in the city. He would kill them, and then he would move on to the next soft target, the market. The apartments. The shelter. He thought of his mother. He thought of Tanaka, of Yui and Kaido. Of the children playing their quiet games in the gym. Probability of successful intervention based on your current performance metrics. 12.8%, Tsuchai stated. Probability of significant collateral damage, 89%. Probability of your incapacitation or death, 72%. Intervention is not advised. The numbers washed over him. They were logical. They were rational. And he didn't care. All Might's face flashed in his mind. A hero is someone who, in the face of fear and despair, chooses to act. I don't care about the odds, Izuku said, his voice hard, resolute. He slammed his helmet back on, the neurointerface flaring to life. There are people in trouble. That's all that matters. He stood up, his movements still clumsy, but now filled with a desperate purpose. Tsuchai, open the exit. And give me a flight path. The most direct one. There was a half-second pause. Acknowledged, the AI replied. Recalibrating for emergency deployment. Good luck, candidate Midoriya. A massive section of the Ark's ceiling slid open, revealing a tunnel that slanted steeply upwards towards the surface. It was time. Izuku took a deep, shuddering breath. Here goes nothing. He engaged the boot jets, and this time, he didn't try to soar. He just pushed, a controlled burn that sent him rocketing up the tunnel. He scraped the side twice, the shriek of metal on metal grating on his nerves, before he burst out of a hidden hatch in the roof of the abandoned Stark building and into the hazy orange light of the setting sun. He wobbled in the air, a newborn bird taking its first terrifying flight. Below him, the city sprawled out, a landscape of ghosts. He could see a pillar of smoke rising from the market district. He pushed more power to the jets, his flight path a drunken, weaving line through the sky. He was a meteor, and he was heading for impact. The scene at the market square was even worse than the radio call had suggested. Cars were overturned, storefronts were shattered, and a small, terrified group of civilians were huddled behind a flimsy police barricade. Sledge was reveling in the chaos. He was a mountain of muscle, his arms transformed into grotesque, gray hammers of bone. With each swing, he sent chunks of asphalt flying. Where are the heroes now, huh? He bellowed, laughing as the police officers took potshots at him with their standard-issue sidearms. The bullets sparked harmlessly off his stony fists. No All Might to save you! No one's coming! And then, someone did. With a sound like a freight train derailing, Izuku made his landing. He had aimed for the center of the square, hoping for a dramatic, heroic entrance. Instead, his stabilizers failed at the last second. He crashed into the ground feet first, the impact shattering the pavement, and sending him tumbling head over heels. He came to a stop in a smoking, 10-foot crater, tangled in his own limbs. Sledge, the police, and the civilians all stared in stunned silence at the newly arrived metal man, currently trying to untangle himself from a pretzel shape. What the hell is that? Sledge grunted, lowering his hammer fist slightly. A hero cosplayer? You're about 5 years too late, pal. Izuku finally managed to get to his feet, the armor's joints groaning in protest. Stop this! He yelled, his voice distorted and amplified by the helmet's external speaker, sounding deeper and more intimidating than he felt. You're terrorizing these people. Terrorizing? Sledge laughed, a nasty, grating sound. Kid, I'm liberating them. From the lie. The lie that someone's gonna protect them. In this world, there's only the strong and the weak. And you, Tin Can, look like you're about to fall over. He was right. Izuku's legs were trembling, his balance precarious. He raised the gauntlet, trying to aim the repulsor. This is your only warning. Sledge just grinned and charged. He was surprisingly fast for his size. Izuku tried to fire, but his aim was high. The blue energy beam shot over Sledge's head and vaporized the sign of a noodle shop, which exploded in a shower of splintered wood and neon tubing. The civilians screamed and ducked. Oops, Izuku muttered. Sledge was on him. He swung his right hammer fist in a wide, brutal arc. Izuku tried to dodge, but he was too slow. The blow caught him square in the chest. The world became a cacophony of noise and pain. The impact felt like being hit by a car. He was lifted off his feet and sent flying backwards, crashing through the window of a department store. Alarms blared. Warning lights flashed across his HUD. Impact warning. Thoracic plate integrity, 81%. Neurofeedback overload. His head rang, and his vision swam. The armor had saved his life, but his body inside it was still just a fragile bag of bones. He felt like he'd been thrown down a flight of stairs in a metal trash can. Is that all you got? Sledge bellowed from outside. My grandma hits harder than that. Izuku pushed himself up, shaking glass from his shoulders. He could see Sledge advancing, a monstrous silhouette against the fires he'd started. He had to end this. He couldn't win a brawl. He needed to use the armor's weapons. He burst out of the shattered storefront, firing both repulsors this time. One blast went wide, carving a deep trench in the street. The other actually hit Sledge in the shoulder, staggering him. A small victory. He pressed his advantage, charging forward, trying to execute a simple punch-and-blast combo he'd seen Iron Man use in old footage. But his movements were clumsy, telegraphed. Sledge, a seasoned brawler, easily sidestepped the punch and brought his other hammer fist down on Izuku's back. The world went white. He was slammed face first into the pavement, the impact cracking his helmet's faceplate. Critical warning, helmet integrity compromised, 45%. Vital signs critical. He was losing. He was failing. He was making things worse. The police were still pinned down, the civilians still in danger. He was just another piece of wreckage in a ruined street. Sledge stood over him, raising both his hammer fists for a final, crushing blow. End of the line, hero. This was it. He was going to die. Here, in this ridiculous suit, trying to be something he wasn't. His vision blurred. He could see the terrified faces of the civilians. He could see his mother's worried smile. He could see All Might, turning to dust. No. A primal scream of defiance erupted from his soul. He wasn't going to die like this. Not while people were watching. Not while there was still a chance. He didn't think. He didn't plan. He reacted. As Sledge brought his fists down, Izuku did the only thing a terrified boy trapped in a metal suit could do. He put his hands up to shield his face, squeezed his eyes shut, and pushed. He pushed with his mind, with his soul, with every ounce of panicked, desperate energy he had. He didn't try to aim a repulsor or throw a punch. He just pushed. Tosh's voice was a calm storm in his ear. Warning, unfocused, full-power omnidirectional repulsor discharge initiated. The world exploded in blue light. It wasn't a beam. It was a wave. A tidal wave of raw, kinetic force erupted from the armor's chest and gauntlets in every direction. It wasn't a precision strike. It was a panic button, a weapon of last resort. The blast shredded the pavement around him, blew out every remaining window in a 2-block radius, and sent cars skidding down the street. The full force of the blast hit Sledge at point-blank range. It didn't pierce him. It simply picked him up, a multi-ton sledgehammer of pure energy, and hurled him backwards. He flew a full 50 yards, tumbling end over end, before crashing into the side of a brick building with enough force to collapse the entire wall. He slumped to the ground, his hammer fist shrinking back into normal arms, unconscious. Silence descended, broken only by the crackle of fires and the distant wail of a single, approaching siren. Izuku lay in the center of a massive crater, the armor smoking, his systems screaming warnings at him. He had won. He pushed himself to his knees, his body screaming in protest. He looked at the devastation he had wrought. The street was a war zone. The department store was ruined. The noodle shop was gone. Cars were on fire. He had saved the civilians, but he had wrecked their neighborhood in the process. The police officers were slowly emerging from cover, their weapons still raised, aimed at him. The civilians were staring, their faces a mixture of gratitude and pure, unadulterated fear. He hadn't inspired them. He had terrified them. He was just another monster who had fought a different monster. He had to get out of there. He forced the battered armor to its feet. He looked at the destruction, at the fear in people's eyes, and a wave of nausea and self-loathing washed over him. He engaged the boot jets. With a final, sorrowful look at the mess he had made, he launched himself into the sky, his flight path just as wobbly and uncertain as before. He crashed back into the Ark, his landing shattering the reinforced launch pad. The armor, battered and smoking, finally disengaged, dropping him unceremoniously onto the cold floor. Izuku Midoriya, the last hope, curled into a ball, shaking uncontrollably. Every muscle ached. His head pounded. He could still smell the smoke, still hear the screams. He had won through sheer, dumb luck and overwhelming firepower. Not skill. Not strategy. Not heroism. He looked at the All Might armor, now scarred, dented, and covered in grime. It looked alien. It looked wrong. A child playing dress-up in his dead father's military uniform. He wasn't a hero. He was an imposter. And he was terrified of the day his luck would finally run out. The silence of the Ark was no longer a comfort. It was an accusation. For 3 days, Izuku hid in the subterranean fortress, a ghost haunting his own tomb of failed aspirations. The physical aches from his disastrous fight with Sledge had subsided into a low, constant thrum of bruised muscles and strained joints. But the psychological wounds were raw, septic, and festering. He couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the terror on the civilians' faces. He saw the street he had torn apart, the buildings he had scarred. He hadn't been a symbol of hope. He'd been a natural disaster in a hero-shaped costume. The victory felt hollow, a trophy won in a game he didn't know how to play, with rules he didn't understand. Toshi had been patient. The AI methodically repaired the symbol-class armor, its drones and manipulator arms working with an unnerving, silent efficiency. Dented plates were replaced, fried circuits were rewired, and the cracked helmet was swapped for a new one from the fabricator. The suit was pristine again, gleaming on its plinth, as if its pilot's catastrophic failure had never happened. It only made Izuku feel worse. Candidate Midoriya, Toshi's voice would interrupt his brooding, your metabolic readings indicate a significant lack of REM sleep and a caloric intake 47% below recommended levels. Continued disregard for your physical well-being will further degrade your combat and decision-making performance. I'm not hungry, Izuku would mumble back, staring at the schematics on the main screen. He wasn't training. He was obsessing. He ran diagnostic after diagnostic, replaying the battle logs from the sledge fight over and over. He saw every mistake, every clumsy movement, every wasted shot. It was a masochistic ritual of self-flagellation. Your analysis is correct, Tio-Seichai commented, displaying a 3D model of the fight. Your flight instability, inefficient energy distribution, and reliance on overwhelming force in lieu of tactical precision were the primary factors in the high level of collateral damage. However, the data also shows a marked improvement in your control during the final moments. Your reactionary time under extreme duress is in the 99th percentile. That's just a number, Izuku snapped, turning away from the screen. That doesn't change what happened. I got lucky. Sledge was a C-lister. What happens when I face a real threat? Someone who can think. Someone who can take a full power blast and keep coming? The unspoken name hung in the air between them, Shigaraki. All for one. He was an imposter. A fraud. The armor was a crutch, and he barely knew how to limp with it. All Might's legacy, Stark's genius, he was tarnishing it all with his incompetence. On the fourth day, Tio-Seichai broke its usual routine. Alert, the AI announced, its tone crisp. Anomalous energy signature detected approaching Arc 07's perimeter. Izuku shot up from the cot he'd been lying on. Villains? How did they find this place? The signature is not consistent with any known villain quirk profiles, Tio-Seichai replied, bringing up a topographical map on the main screen. 4 distinct energy signatures were moving in a coordinated pattern, sweeping the area. They are utilizing advanced scanning technology, military grade. Their pattern is systematic. They are not stumbling, they are hunting. The lead signature, a pulsing red dot on the map, stopped directly over their location. Perimeter breach imminent, Tio-Seichai stated calmly. Defensive protocols engaged. Outer blast doors sealed. Would you like me to deploy the automated defense turrets? No, Izuku said, his heart hammering. Don't shoot unless I say so. Who are they? Their energy signatures are masked, but I am cross-referencing their gait, body mass, and movement patterns against the global database. 3 matches found. 1 unknown. 3 holographic files appeared on the screen, and Izuku felt the air leave his lungs. The first was a man with tired, bloodshot eyes, a wild mane of black hair, and a familiar capture weapon wrapped around his neck. Aizawa, Shota, Eraserhead. Status, active. The second showed a young man with explosive, spiky blonde hair and a perpetual scowl. Bakugo, Katsuki, unregistered. Status, active. The third, a boy with heterochromatic hair and a solemn expression. Todoroki, Shoto, unregistered. Status, active. Ghosts. They were ghosts from his past, specters of the life he was supposed to have had. Aizawa-sensei. Kaken. Todoroki-kun. They were alive. They were here. They're heroes, Izuku breathed, a wave of dizzying relief washing over him, quickly followed by a spike of pure terror. They weren't here for a social call. They were hunting the source of the chaos at the market square. They were hunting him. They are employing a seismic charge, Tio-Seichai reported. A moment later, a low thump vibrated through the floor of the Ark. Structural integrity is holding, but they have confirmed our subterranean location. They are preparing to breach the main entrance. Izuku's mind raced. He couldn't fight them. He wouldn't. But what could he do? Reveal himself? A quirkless Deku in a suit of godlike armor he could barely control. Aizawa would restrain him, Bakugo would try to kill him, and they'd all be right to do so. Tio-Seichai, he said, his voice trembling. Open the main entrance. Disarm all defenses. And get the armor ready. There was a moment of silence from the AI. This course of action carries a high degree of personal risk, candidate. Just do it, Izuku said, his resolve hardening. He wasn't going to hide. He owed them an explanation. He owed his past that much. Outside, the air was thick with tension. Shota Aizawa stood before the blank, moss-covered concrete wall, his capture weapon held loosely in his hands, his eyes narrowed. 5 years of fighting a losing war had etched deep lines into his face, but his gaze was as sharp and weary as ever. "This is it," he said, his voice a low gravel. The energy signature from the sledge incident originated from this location. Beside him, Katsuki Bakugo cracked his knuckles, small explosions popping in his palms. He was taller, broader, his hero costume a patched-up, road-worn version of his Yue design. The anger in his eyes was a constant, simmering fire. So, some new freak with a high-powered quirk decided to play hero and trashed half a city block. Let's dig him out and see how tough he is without his surprise party tricks. Shoto Todoroki stood on Bakugo's other side, a silent pillar of ice and fire. He radiated a cold, focused calm that was the perfect counterpoint to Bakugo's heat. A massive burn scar, a fresh addition from some forgotten battle in the last 5 years, covered the left side of his jaw, a stark reminder that this world played for keeps. His energy output was immense, but uncontrolled, Todoroki noted, his breath pluming in the cool air. He's powerful, but inexperienced. Dangerous. The fourth member of their team, a young woman with a determined look in her brown eyes and pink circles on her cheeks, stood ready. Achiko Uraraka, her costume reinforced with scavenged armor plates, touched a nearby boulder. "If you need a way in, I can make the rubble weightless." They were a unit. Forged in the crucible of a broken world, they were all that was left of Yue's next generation. They operated out of the heavily fortified, battle-scarred remnants of the Hero Academy, a small, lonely bastion of hope led by the unshakable Principal Niza. They were the vanguard. "Hold," Aizawa said, his eyes widening slightly. With a silent hiss of hydraulics, the blank wall in front of them began to slide open. Bakugo grinned ferally. "Guess he wants to come out and play." He moved to the front, his gauntlets primed. The entrance revealed a dark, descending staircase. No ambush. No attack. Just an open invitation. The 4 heroes exchanged wary glances. This was too easy. "Stay sharp," Aizawa warned, taking the lead. This could be a trap. They descended into the darkness, their senses on high alert. The staircase opened into the vast, silent chamber of the Ark. The scale of the place, the sheer technological superiority, stopped them in their tracks. It was like stepping into the future, or a museum of a future that never came to be. "What is this place?" Uraraka whispered, her eyes wide with awe. "Stark Tech," Todoroki said, his gaze sweeping over the humming servers and holographic projectors. "My father, he was obsessed with trying to replicate it. He never got close." Bakugo just scowled, unimpressed by the light show. "Forget the hardware. Where's the tenant?" As if on cue, a figure stepped out from the shadows of the central platform. He was clad in the symbol class armor, its red, white, and blue plating gleaming under the Ark's lights. It was an imposing sight, a perfect fusion of the world's 2 greatest heroes. The helmet was on, its faceplate dark and unreadable. Bakugo didn't hesitate. "There you are, you son of a bitch!" he roared, launching himself forward with an explosion. But before he could get close, Aizawa's capture weapon shot out, wrapping around the armored figure's torso. "Stand down," Aizawa commanded. His hair rose, his eyes glowed red, activating his quirk. The effect was nothing. "My quirk, it's not working," Aizawa said, his voice laced with disbelief. "This isn't a quirk. It's technology." The armored figure didn't fight back. He simply stood there, bound by the capture weapon, his head bowed slightly. "Who are you?" Aizawa demanded, his voice dangerously low. "What is this place? And why did you nearly level a city block?" The figure remained silent for a long moment. Then, with a soft hiss, the helmet retracted, folding back into the suit's collar. The face it revealed was pale, gaunt, and framed by a familiar mess of dark green hair. His green eyes, filled with a mixture of terror, shame, and a soul-deep weariness, looked up and met theirs. The reaction was a symphony of stunned silence. Uraraka gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Deku-kun?" Todoroki's eyes widened, his stoic composure cracking for the first time in years. Aizawa just stared, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. Midoriya Izuku. The earnest, quirkless problem child from his entrance exams all those years ago. The boy who had vanished after the snap, presumed to be just another statistic. But it was Bakugo's reaction that was the most profound. His explosive rage, the defining feature of his existence, was instantly extinguished, replaced by a look of stunned, absolute, slack-jawed disbelief. His forward momentum ceased. His hands fell to his sides. Deku? The name was a choked whisper. It wasn't an insult. It was a question. A question that held 5 years of unspoken history. He looked from Izuku's familiar, terrified face to the impossible, godlike armor he was wearing, and his brain short-circuited. No, Bakugo breathed, taking a step back. No way. It can't be. He pointed a trembling finger. You're quirkless. You're a damn ghost. What is this? Some kind of sick joke? Izuku flinched, the old insult hitting him with the force of a physical blow. It's me, Kaken, he said, his voice hoarse. Don't call me that. Bakugo roared, the shock finally giving way to a fresh, more confusing wave of fury. This was a violation of the natural order of things. Deku, the pebble he had spent his entire life looking down on, was here, wrapped in a power that dwarfed his own. It was an existential insult. What did you do? Where did you get this tin can? Bakugo, stand down. Aizawa snapped, regaining his composure. He turned his full, analytical gaze on Izuku. Midoriya. Start talking. Now. And so, the story came tumbling out. The discovery of the breadcrumb. The Arkansas. The message from Stark and All Might. The contingency for a world without heroes. He spoke with a quiet, desperate honesty, his voice cracking as he recounted All Might's final, recorded words. When he finished, the silence in the ark was thick with the weight of it. Uraraka was openly crying, her hand clasped over her heart at the mention of All Might's hope. Todoroki's expression was unreadable, but a new, complex light burned in his eyes. Aizawa looked like he had aged another 10 years. Bakugo, however, just shook with a quiet, simmering rage. So that's it? He sneered, his voice dripping with venom. All Might and some billionaire playboy left you the keys to the kingdom? While the rest of us were out there, fighting and bleeding in the dirt for 5 years, you were hiding in this fancy bunker, waiting for a dead man's handout? That's not how it was. Izuku protested, his voice rising. I only found this place a week ago. And I wasn't hiding. I was at the Musudafu shelter. You were what? Fixing toilets? Bakugo spat. You're a cheat, Deku. You've always been a cheat. First, you get a quirk out of nowhere before UA, and now this. You're just hiding inside a suit because you're too weak to stand on your own. Bakugo, that is enough, a new voice said. It was small, cheerful, and carried an authority that no one dared to question. From the shadows near the entrance, Principal Nizu emerged, sipping from a delicate teacup. The small, white creature, a bear? A dog? A mouse, surveyed the scene, his black, bead-like eyes missing nothing. A fascinating turn of events, Nizu said, his tail swishing thoughtfully. A secret initiative between the world's two greatest heroes, a network of hidden installations, and a successor chosen not for his power, but for his spirit. It is precisely the kind of impossibly brilliant and recklessly sentimental plan I would have expected from them. He hopped onto a nearby console, his presence immediately shifting the dynamic of the room. Bakugo-kun's assessment, while lacking in tact, touches upon a valid point. You possess a resource of unimaginable power, Midoriya-kun. And your first outing resulted in significant property damage and public terror. You are, at present, a liability. Izuku flinched, the words striking him harder than any of Sledge's punches. I know, he whispered, his gaze falling to the floor. I'm not ready. I'm not a hero. No, you are not, Nizu agreed pleasantly. You are a boy with a tool he does not understand. We, on the other hand, are heroes with dwindling resources and a war to fight. I believe we have found ourselves in a situation of mutual opportunity. The principal looked from Izuku to his small, hardened team of survivors. The vanguard has the experience, the training, and the manpower. You, Midoriya-kun, have the hardware, the global intel of this facility, and a strategic mind that, if I recall from your UA application essays, is second to none. The logical course of action is to merge our assets. The proposal hung in the air. A deal. A partnership. You want to work with him? Bakugo snarled, gesturing wildly at Izuku. He'll get us all killed. He is untrained, Aizawa corrected, his tone measured. Not incapable. His actions at the warehouse, as reported by our sources, showed remarkable ingenuity and courage. He has potential, but he needs guidance. He needs a leash. Aizawa's dark eyes met Izuku's. I can provide one. It would be an honor to fight alongside you all, Uraraka said softly, giving Izuku a small, watery, but genuine smile. It was the first truly kind expression he'd seen in days, and it almost broke him. Todoroki simply nodded. His resources would be a significant tactical advantage against Shigaraki. The decision was made. Izuku was no longer alone in his subterranean world. But the feeling wasn't one of pure relief. It was a new kind of pressure. The pressure of their expectations. He looked at their faces, hardened, scarred, and weary from a war he had only watched from the sidelines. He had their support, but he would have to earn their trust. He would have to earn his place. He looked at Bakugo, who was staring at him with a look of furious, confused betrayal. Earning his trust would be the hardest part of all. Very well, Nizu chirped, clapping his small paws together. The Vanguard has a new headquarters, and a new member. Welcome to the team, Midoriya-kun. I hope you're a fast learner. The world isn't going to wait for you to catch up. Izuku stood in the center of the arc, surrounded by the ghosts of his past, and the architects of his future. The ill-fitting armor he wore suddenly felt 10 times heavier. It wasn't just the legacy of All Might and Iron Man he was carrying now. It was the hope of his friends, the last heroes of a broken world. And he was terrified he was going to let them all down.